What's up everybody, I'm Derek, this is Rocking eForge, and today I'm going to be forging a coffee scoop out of steel and copper because I'd like to spruce up my morning routine, so let's get rocking. Alright, so now that I've got the hollow half twist forged in, I'm going to go ahead and finish up the leaf by first forging the stem into a round cross section to kind of nicely transition from the handle to the stem. Alright, so now that that leaf is finished, I'm going to spin this around and start working on the other end here. The first thing I need to do, based on how I had this previously tapered, this is just the way that the piece started out. I had a taper forged on here. I'm not going to have enough material to widen out and be able to rivet through for the cup of the coffee scoop. To accomplish that, I'm going to have to fold this over and forge weld it, and then widen whatever resulting lump of material ends up there out into the point where I want to rivet through. All right, so this has cooled down. It's a few days later, and I just need a little bit here that I'm going to fold over and forge weld as the material that I'm going to spread out to connect to the actual cup or bowl of the scoop here. And as such, I'm just going to cut some of this off, just kind of eyeball it, and then we'll get a forge weld in here shortly after we set up the material for that forge weld. Alright, so the next thing I need to do is forge the scarf here. I'm just going to forge a blunt single-sided taper and forge that down. Sorry, double-sided taper here, and then forge that down. And really I'm just doing this in order to fold this over appropriately and get a decent forge weld out of it. So I'm going to dress the end of that with a file, and we'll be back in just a second. Now the reason that I forged this scarf the way I did is to avoid having any extra material causing overlap at the point of the forge weld. I'm about to fire up the grinder here and then grind off this forge scale that's on this surface that's going to be forge welded together to have the best chance of a good forge weld. And I'm going to flux this up before it gets too hot and develops all that scale, and we'll get this forge welded together just by folding this or bending this in, and then I'll be able to forge the actual wide portion that's going to rivet together to the cup. Alright, so I'm just going to bend this over the edge of the anvil here. Way too much, but I'm gonna give it tons just for good measure. And I just want to close this up That iron mountain flux that I just put on there is going to minimize the amount of forge scale that happens in that little area that's about to be welded together, and hopefully improve our chances of getting a good forge weld. Now the next step is going to be bringing this to a lemon yellow heat. A couple of sparks coming off of it is okay, but a lot of sparks means you're burning the steel. You're probably not gonna be able to hear me because I'm gonna have the forge roaring and I need to do a couple of heats all in all. So I'm not gonna talk my way through this. I'm just going to get on to the forge weld and I'll be back with you in just a moment. All right, so that is looking like a very solid forge weld. It feels solid under the hammer, so I'm going to move to spreading this with a ball peen because I want as much spread out of it as possible. So we're gonna get that done, and then we'll shortly move on to dapping the actual cup for the copper cup for this. Let's keep on rocking. All right, so I'm gonna bring this to the near edge of the anvil, flipped over on the opposite side I've been hammering on, and just kind of step that off. And then I'm gonna start trying to spread it a little further laterally using the crossbeam here. Looks like I need to spread this side a little bit more. Now I'm just planishing this to even up the surface on the back here. This is simply going to kick off at an angle, and I'm going to grind this to its final shape in order to hold 2 copper rivets on the cup of this scoop. And we'll get to that point once I've actually dapped the copper scoop. So let's go ahead and transition to that, and we'll leave this to cool down for a little bit. All right, so I've got a piece of copper sheeting here, and I'm just going to use this hole saw bit, for lack of a better word, as a guide for the circle that I want to cut out here. And I'm just going to move this right up to the edges to minimize the amount of stuff that I have to cut. And it's nicely squiggly and sawtooth, as you can probably tell. That's all right. All right, I'm gonna track down some WD-40, but I'm gonna use this old pair of 10 snips that I found at a yard sale yesterday, actually, to cut as much off as possible, and then I'm gonna take it to the grinder and just grind off the little extra edges that are left. But I gotta loosen these up a little bit before I do that, so I'll be back in half a second. All right, it is pretty darn close to a circle. That doesn't matter too much that I've, not held perfectly to that circle. It's going to be correctable once I get it to kind of to the final shape. So I'm gonna bring this over to the vise, and I'm gonna start in the center, hammering this down in a method called dapping. First thing I'm going to do actually is going to take it to the forge, heat it up very slightly, not to the point where it'll melt, obviously, because copper is a much lower melting point to steel. And then I'm going to quench it to anneal it and make sure it is as soft as possible before going through this process. All right, so as I said, I'm just going to run this in and out of the flame a little bit. I'm trying to get to what's considered a red heat for copper. And you can see the green flame coming out as the fire starts to kind of burn that copper. Kind of neat. This is the way to anneal copper, very much opposite that of steel. So you take it, you heat it up, and then you quench it in water, whereas steel, that's the way to harden it, much the opposite of the annealing process. There it is. Getting real close here. All right, so that's now a nice bright copper color, other than all of the now baked on stuff that hopefully comes off in the dapping process. We're gonna head back to the vise and start working on the bowl or cup to this little coffee scoop. All right, so I've got a very improvised dapping setup with a ball peen hammer locked in the vise here, and I've got a little baby ball peen that I'm gonna use to dap with. I believe that's the right term. If not, let me know in the comments section what this actually is called. But the idea here is to use the striking face of your hammer as kind of an anvil, so to speak. I'm going to start striking close to the center, or as close as I can get it. And this is going to cause spreading of the material to the point where it actually cups over in the direction of the ball peen being used as the anvil face, or as the supporting face there. I'm going to slowly move in concentric circles around the center and then move outward in circles as I get it further and further shaped. And hopefully we'll get a nice cup out of this with a hammered texture to it at the end, and I can polish up all of this extra stuff on the outside and on the inside. Actually, I should probably do that first. Kind of sand all this stuff off before I get started. I will see you in just a minute. It's actually really good to note here that I'm having plenty of errant blows here because I'm going real fast, but I'm not meaning to bend this over. I am actually, no kidding, meaning to strike straight up and down on the point that I am striking. I'm not doing straight up and down, but a little bit off to the side because that feels more comfortable. I'm not meaning to bend this over. This little kind of ribbony edge that I'm getting here is a result of accidentally hitting at a spot where it's unsupported, so it's actually bending the copper as opposed to actually forcing it to spread in the way that I want it to. You want to try to avoid that. You want to try to avoid hitting unsupported off over not contacting the surface here if you're doing this. This is what I'm trying to avoid here. All right, so I've gotten this copper bowl shaped and ready to move on to the next step. I'm going to go ahead and just grind this edge down to a nice flat surface. But the next step I'm going to do is take this little flange, also grind this, and then kick this off slightly and try to shape it as best I can to try to match the curvature of the bowl as best I can so that I can rivet it all together and everything is nice and solid. So let's get to the grinder and then get this thing back in the forge. Before I actually bend this over and start moving it to the final shape that I want to get out of here, I need to center punch and drill the holes in this little thing. Right about there is gonna get me all right. And that ended up a little messed up, so I'm gonna try to offset that here. There we go. Marginally better. And I'm going to try to eyeball the same location here on the other side. So we're gonna go get some holes drilled through this, and then I'm gonna shape this to the size and shape of the bowl. All right, so I'm gonna quench just the spot with the holes so that hopefully I can avoid messing this up here. I'm gonna lay it right off the edge of the anvil and just try to set that off. And try to just kick that off at an angle. And hopefully match. Need to go a little bit farther probably. But the idea is to match the angle of the scoop so that I can rivet that to the scoop and do my best to try to match the curvature, but that's going to be a bit of a challenge. And every little bit of change to the curvature is going to change how those holes come out too. So I don't want to do too much because the holes will get deformed. But as close as I can get to that, the better, because that'll make sure it matches up the best with the bowl and looks the best in the final product. Just trying to smooth out this edge here. All right, check that initial curvature or that initial bend here again. Hey, that's looking pretty good. So this is going to be where I stop here, and next heat I'm going to heat up the actual connector and try to give that a slight bit of curve, just barely at the tip to try to meet the curvature of the cup. All right, so I'm gonna use this baby little ball peen here and just do real light taps. You can probably hear that translating straight into the microphone. Yeah, so that's got a little bit of curvature. And now I have, before I put the bowl on, I need to decide on the final shape of the actual handle I want to do here. Do I want it to be curved? Do I want it to be straight the way it is currently? And I got to do some contemplating on that before I actually finalize the overall piece here. Thank goodness I looked a little closer at the overall, because I almost forgot that the whole thing curves in every axis, not just upward from there. So this is probably already changed. It's probably going to be the closest I can get out of it. It's not very even, or it's a little oddly shaped at this point, but that actually turned out pretty darn good. Now, unfortunately, I've got a little bit of crack developing there. One side of that forge weld seems to have separated. And I'm not sure if that's because I didn't get a good enough forge weld or because as I was hammering and spreading all that out, it just ended up separating on that seam. But it shouldn't really mess with the structural integrity of the scoop. And as such, I'm just gonna leave it that way. That looks pretty darn good. Everything kind of meets up, and I'm pretty happy with the way that turned out. I've decided to keep this straight, and I'm just gonna really gently, while this is still orange, brush this so that I can put a nice layer of wax on this before I actually rivet it to the bowl of the scoop. All right, so we're gonna let this cool down and get the holes drilled in the dome in order to affix this all together, and we'll be finished. Basically just gonna hope that this lines up all right. and re-drill this hole here. It's ugly, but it'll work. Trying to get these to widen a little bit in there, because I'm obviously going to grind this down to make this look a little better, but that's going to take a bit of finagling by itself, so I got to find a spot. Maybe that'll work. I'm going to support this on the inside along one of the edges of the anvil and hammer these down and then grind off the excess. Try to get that as flush as possible. But we are almost finished. Oh, okay. Right side, this is copper. I can go ahead and knock that back in by just taking it back to the ball peen locked in the vise. And that's what I'll do here. All right, so I finally got those rivets all finalized and riveted in there and got the scoop kind of reshaped. I really like the way this turned out, honestly. It's comfortable to use. It's rugged and rough, and you know, it's certainly not perfect, and that pretty much goes for everything that I make. I really like the hollow half twist that I put into this, and if you want to see how I forged this to a higher degree of detail than I put in this video, check out wherever the little card comes up. And all in all, I'm very happy with the way this turned out, and I'm pretty excited to have something to scoop my coffee beans in the morning to make my morning coffee. Anyway, that is going to do it for today's video. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like, leave a comment, hit subscribe, ring that notification bell. If you want to support me in the channel further, please consider becoming an honorary striker on my Patreon. That link is in the description below the video, or please consider becoming a member on my YouTube channel. And as always, keep on rocking.